Welcome everyone to Diverse Voices, dedicated to sharing leadership stories with viewers. Hi LinkedIn, hi YouTube. So excited for today's conversation with Ted Witherell. For those of you who don't know Ted, he is on the faculty and a coach at Harvard's T.H. School of Public Health and runs his own coaching practice. He's been in healthcare roles for about 25 years. So I think today we'll have a great conversation. Hi, Ted.
Hi, Michael. How are you?
I am fantastic.
I have to say, I was a little upset that you interrupted the music because it's had such a lovely vibe. I was kind of just relaxing. It was great.
I play a little acoustic guitar in the background, which I find can be very relaxing. I'll send you my CD later.
Please.
Perfect. Well, for everyone who's joining us today, I've sort of titled this in two different ways. There's how context drives better coaching in healthcare and everywhere. The reason I started that point is because of Ted's amazing experience, as I mentioned before, of 25 years in leadership roles in healthcare. His work currently at Harvard's T.H. Chan School of Public Health. So my belief is that Ted will be able to share with all of you just his view on bringing leadership development to the education of clinical leaders, those of you in the healthcare space. But I also believe from the conversations I've had with Ted over our period of time together that what we're going to be sharing today and his perspective can be applicable outside of healthcare. But I think healthcare is going to be an interesting thread throughout this conversation. Does that sound fair, Ted? No pressure on you, obviously.
Yeah, no pressure. Yeah, no, actually, the more I've thought about this, the healthcare context now, just given the COVID world we find ourselves in, is so relevant and in so many different ways. So yeah, I'm excited.
Oh, fantastic. Well, there's a lot we can talk about when it comes to just goals in general. And I thought since your background is that of a coach, we could talk a little bit about your work as a coach in the healthcare environment and talk a little bit about the importance of coaching within healthcare. Because my view is, coming from a family that has doctors in it, is that sometimes those in healthcare need to know a lot and need to speak with authority on all the things that they know. So sometimes they may not be open to doing things a little differently or being open to certain questions. So perhaps we can start with your view on healthcare and coaching in that space.
So I several thoughts. I would start off with, I love the way you kind of talked about your own family and your own experience. The notion that one of the things that we think about is confidently held misinformation, right? And oftentimes I'm finding that when I'm speaking with my world-renowned clinicians, they know lots and lots and lots about some really important stuff, but not everything about everything, right? So there's some of that that sort of makes its way through. No, absolutely. I think that the prevailing theme for me when I think about healthcare and its needs right now is healing. Right, we're in this space where my healthcare friends are just really suffering. The idea right now of healing is so important, and I'm seeing that. I was with a group of physicians, about 50 physicians from around the country, for the past 2 weeks in a leadership program. I'm sure as I'm talking throughout today, I'll make a lot of reference to that because it was in so many ways profound for me to spend time with them. But it really struck me when I was having lunch with a group of them, and one of them in particular got angry, like viscerally angry. We signed up for this. We're doing all these things to care for all these folks. We'll do this. We'll put ourselves at risk. There were several stories of physicians who had COVID before the vaccine, and they've done these kinds of things. This is what we do. But we have folks who are choosing not to, and the physician's opinion about that, it feels disrespectful, when it comes down to it. So just where I'm kind of going is this level of emotion that is just right there on the surface with the way they've been working, how hard they've been working, and how close they've been to life and death for the last year. So when I think about coaching or any kind of leadership development right now, it really to me is the bottom of the Maslow's hierarchy. It really is just about how do we really help them right now with the threats that we all are sort of feeling right now and how they're experiencing it.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. They've been in a tough place since the early moments of this pandemic and the virus that is spreading. And I can appreciate that not everyone has a healthcare background. Like the language of healthcare, for those of us who step into a doctor's office, can be a little cold. It can be a little off-putting, and it's in many ways foreign language. So for some in America and around the world, they may not have a high degree of trust built within their relationships with the healthcare industry. So it's so important that we respect the hard work that they do, and also the way in which they're trying to bridge gaps to help people within their own healthcare, right? They're trying to coach others, I would say. They're trying to coach their patients into hearing their advice. And in 2021, sometimes the time they get with their patients is truncated. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of individuals who need healthcare, and in essence, going from patient to patient, it can be, to your point, pretty taxing. So I do recognize that there's a lot of pressure for them, but there's also a lot of opportunity where I think individuals such as yourself and other coaches or other partners can help those in healthcare communicate better, find more common ground. It's likely that helps so many of us with our experiences.
Yeah, totally agree. I think it's such a nice way to think about it. I think about opportunity on two levels. Again, in the last couple of months, talking to some physician leaders and kind of really speaking with them about change and helping them kind of understand the change management and the discipline and the science behind that, and how can they help change management go happen. And so many of them, when faced with danger versus opportunity, they're like implicit in the notion of change, they choose the opportunity. So many folks had these amazing stories of the kinds of things they did when things got really, really crazy. All the systems are out the window. Let's just do this. Really impressive stories. So the idea of, and one of my beliefs around coaching is that the person being coached is creative, resourceful, and whole. So many examples of these folks showing up as creative, resourceful, and whole. And then on the other hand, you're exactly right. in terms of working with a physician or anyone in the medical world, there certainly are a lot of opportunities. There is a certain way of communicating that sometimes doesn't work, right? And so I found myself with a lot of opportunities to be able to help folks, even just to see how when I'm communicating in a certain way and it makes perfect sense to me, maybe it's not landing the same way with the other person. Impact versus intent. I have a number of different kind of examples of that I've experienced lately with folks.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about in that, like the words we say and the way they land. It will go way beyond our brief conversation today. I think every coach and everyone in the talent and leadership space, and that doesn't exclude everybody else, talks about, well, what did you say? What did you mean? How did that land? And thinking about those things. But I think it would be helpful, especially for those outside of healthcare, if we talk about context. So context, my background is heavily in the creative and communication space. So I always try to think about context, but obviously in coaching, that matters as well. But before we get to that, I think from a contextual standpoint, we could talk a little bit, and maybe you can answer this, is why do we set goals in coaching relationships?
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up, because I think we almost could lose that in a larger conversation of context. And goals are so critical. In fact, so I've been going through a second certification process, and this one is specifically in coaching in the world of healthcare, but it certainly goes broader. And what it's really brought to life for me is the importance of goals. And my educational background, I have a master's in counseling psychology. So the idea of counseling versus coaching becomes a big piece of discussion. And one of the things that differentiates them is goals, right? So if I'm working with a coach, Yogi Berra had this quote, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So that idea of setting a goal gives us a road, and it gives me some toeholds so that I can kind of move forward. More and more, what I'm finding is folks have a level of, I'll just call it confusion, but there's something that's going on that's saying I'm not able to move where I need to move. By establishing a goal, it allows us to kind of like peel away some of the extraneous that might be kind of creating noise. And more importantly, there's been more and more work that I've done in my coaching practice around then having the rest of the conversation. Okay, you've stated this is your goal. Now let's really make sure that we truly understand this and the nuances, and what would it mean for you to achieve this goal? What will be different? How would it help you? And that conversation is newer to me in my coaching practice. And what I'm finding is a greater adherence for that goal, larger sort of a bigger affective connection to it, more drive to want to accomplish it, and then that much more self-awareness that happens in the context of trying to achieve it. And then actually on another level too, having a goal stated, oftentimes coaching takes place within a larger context of not just the coachee and the coach, but there's managers and others involved. Having a stated goal also begins to help with, okay, are we being effective in this space?
Yeah, I love how you bridge that. And for those who haven't had coaching experience, even outside of it, if you think about the way we want to accomplish and be successful as our week goes on, as our month goes on, or in our job, setting that goal, I recognize that all good and great leaders and managers work with their teams and other individuals to set a goal, right? Like beyond this needs to be done by the end of the day. That is certainly a stated type of goal. But when you're looking at growth and what coaching can offer, as well as how an organization measures success, where do you want to be in 6 months? That type of question can easily apply to a coaching relationship. But yeah. I think that go ahead.
I was I so agree, Michael. And I think also there's something else that I'm working with any leader, especially as they're growing to the next level. Oftentimes when a leader's kind of moving from more of a managerial or even individual contributor to a leader, the thing that they don't do as well is articulate what's important. And to me, goal setting is a way to start to get into that. You can have it be sort of tactical, but they can then begin to find language for something bigger. And I think that's a really important part of leading.
Yeah, and I think it was maybe Warren Buffett who said, write down a list of all the things you want to accomplish, and then order them in whatever way you need, and then look at your number one, cross out everything else, and that's what you should focus on. That is the way you derive a goal, because if it's so important, it's your number one, it is what you should be focusing on and measuring against.
I love it.
I don't know that I'm going to be pulling out many more quotes like that, but
that was a good one.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'd like to drive to the heart of this type of conversation, because we talked a little bit about context, but I also think context within healthcare can be an interesting way to look at this, but also context of where that coachee or that individual or team that is being coached, we look at the context of what they're up against or what they're facing or the environment they're in. So maybe we can start with, how can context inform those outcomes?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, as we've been talking about context, I've realized how contextual I am. So I have a bias. To me, it's so important. My background, as I mentioned before, I sort of moved in a counseling world, but I moved into the world of business and organizations. And so I have an organization development lens. And to me, that's all about diagnosing context, and everything takes place within that context. It's sort of like, petri dish, right? And literally the petri dish is the quote culture, right? Pun intended, for everything else that takes place. So that notion of culture, I tend to try to start there. And it's the foreground background. So in a sense, there are things that are happening inside an organization that we need to understand that person. But I think really where I often try to go very first is, how is any individual or any team, wherever I'm doing that work, how are they understanding the world within which they sit? Because we are social creatures by our brain structure, and we sit inside these larger contexts. So that's where I start. And let me just sort of pause there, because I think we can go on and on, but let me let you direct where we should go from here.
Well, thank you for that. I think that I recognize that the context of their environment and what they may be facing is something that those who've not been coached can be so critical. In essence, getting a sense of the baseline of their environment. What's it like working there? Tell me a little bit about your boss. Tell me about your team. And even peeling back the layers of the onion to understand their context and help them to frame their context. So that way, as a coach, you can sort of reflect back, okay, what I heard you say about your team is X or Y or Z. We could ask questions such as, how do we know that's to be true? Have you asked them about that baseline? So I think that context can set up the framework and also let us know what that individual may be facing.
Yeah.
But there's probably a lot more to it in the experiences that you've had.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. I think, first of all, as a coach, I'm always doing my work. And going back to what I said a few minutes ago about I'm contextual, I need to do my work to make sure that I am understanding the context and being fair with the context, right? Looking at my own biases, etc. Whether I'm internal, because when you live inside the culture that you're coaching in, there's certain biases that are there, or whether I'm external and I'm learning, and I found oftentimes being external, it's easy to shortcut. It's so simple because I don't live inside of that culture. And by the way, the definition I use for culture is the way we do things around here, which is just so full, right? So full and fraught. So you're exactly right. So, if I look at it on the various levels as an individual, those kinds of questions that you brought up, what does that mean to you? How are you experiencing this? Those kinds of questions it's just a prime way for getting to a place of self-discovery. And I'm finding in that space, one, because I have this organization development background, I have a number of tools and frameworks where I can pull in the questions. I know that I need to go down my checklist of leadership, politics. Like I need to go down all those. So I have that as I'm asking these questions. And that's a nice way to begin to kind of frame. But then what I'm finding is I start to learn and understand what's important to that person. And that can lead me to the bigger questions. What is it about that that's important to you? Or noticing as someone's describing something, you start to notice, you get energized when you speak about this. Your energy goes down when you speak about this. Tell me what that's about. A lot of that comes up, I found, in that place of context for folks. And shining that mirror, sometimes just shining that mirror in that process of beginning to establish the goals and setting those goals inside context, sometimes that's really as far as the coaching, in my experience, needs to go, because that awareness is what they need to be able to go to that next space.
Yeah, there's something to that that speaks to me in a one-on-one conversation, because you don't know the environment that they're in. You're only getting their side of the story and the narration that they're sharing. If they go down a tangential road, you might lose an entire thread of context that would have been valuable. How is that different from when you're in an environment of group or team coaching, like similar to the experiences you were sharing in the past couple of weeks, when you've been working with others and they can start to frame out how they're being seen, how they're being heard? I'll stop there and let you.
No, wonderful. Yeah, I mean, that's very much on my mind, because that was such a big output from these last few weeks that I've spent with a number. In this case, it was physician leaders. And the short answer is kind of like, if you think about how does group differ from individual in that space, it's way more complicated, right? As soon as you put 2 or 3 or 4, the connections start to become really complicated. And that complexity becomes very, very important in terms of understanding. I'll give you an example, I think, over the last couple of weeks. So part of this leadership program is I do in situ observations. So the program is structured so that they're working through cases and they have a small discussion group. It's a big group of 50, and there's a whole world in that room of 50 that is very different from each of these rooms of 6 to 8 people. They're working through, and what I do is I just sit down and simply do it. It's a tool called the sociogram, and literally it just maps out who speaks to whom. And at the end of the conversation, I can literally show, I hold up a piece of paper and it shows lines drawn who spoke to whom. And you can see in black and white on paper, or in this case, I use multiple colors. So in yellow, green, and blue, and purple, you can see who spoke, who didn't speak, who spoke to the group, who spoke to the individual. And just simply holding that up, you can really see people move backwards and start to work through what just happened. What does that mean? Did I speak enough? Did I speak too much? And in many cases, what I found is just that simple piece of data allowed us to move to a different conversation, a process commentary, where groups are not often able to talk about the process because they're so busy talking about the product. And in a couple of cases, I had groups that would talk about what it really meant to be the one who didn't get their voice in. Why couldn't they get the voice in? What is it about the group? And so I had a number of folks then in offline conversations kind of examining, how did I contribute to this? Did I speak too much? I always speak first in room. Maybe I should hold back, and it led to us a number of different conversations, and it also led to things about microaggressions. And I, as a white male, speak first is different from a white female or a person of color, etc. So it led to a lot of realizations in that particular group around that, which then went back to these individuals starting to make some decisions about their own behavior going forward.
Yeah, I can envision where that can be a very powerful dynamic. And it makes me reflect on situations in the room where I've observed one person always speaking, or one individual getting validation. No matter what they've said, it's rarely heard. But then when the authority figure says, basically echoes on, now people are paying attention. And there can be opportunities even in the room for that person who's gotten some sense of authority, or seen as an authority figure, to leverage their voice, to give their voice to others, to create an allyship, which I can find really, really intriguing.
It absolutely can. And yet that's a couple of steps away from where we were, the basic, simple realization. I'm a physician leader. I've always led this way. I was trained this way. And now I find myself in a situation where for the first time I'm realizing something here. And they're in this space of making sense of that. It was for me, it was on 2 different levels. One is just as a coach, being able to hold that mirror up in a way that held some level of psychological safety, right? And just so they can explore and then being present. And the other level, in a lot of ways, as the program director for this whole program that I'm speaking about, it was my responsibility to create and hold psychological safety for the entire room. So as a leader, I found myself confronting my own, coaching myself, kind of going back and confronting some of my own, all the things that come up in that space. So.
Yeah, well, we're all human, and so those moments are all learning moments. But since you've been spending a lot of time in healthcare, I'd love to understand in what ways can the healthcare industry support the learning journey of its leaders?
Yeah, I think the primary thing goes back a little bit to where we were before. I really think it's bottom of the pyramid, bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, where right now we really are about healing. It really is, and in so many different ways. When I'm working with my various leaders, it is the just watch out for what are the threats. And by threats, I'm kind of going to brain science, the Neuro Leadership Institute and David Rock, and they talk about threats. And I love the framework that they put out there, which is, SCARF, right? And there's, so there's status and certainty and autonomy and relatedness and fairness. So I'm helping my leaders to kind of say, when you're thinking about the experience that your folks are having right now, what